Okay, today is Wednesday, April 9th of 2025, and I'm going to make another video, as many of you have requested, discussing part 2 of 1984. I will get this posted as soon as I can. We will probably watch it in class tomorrow as a way to review you for your part 2 test, which is on Friday of this week. So, I have all versions of the part 2 test in front of me. There are 10 chapters in part 2 of 1984. And the first 6 of those chapters are dominated by Winston and Julia. And so immediately when we jump into part 2, their relationship changes pretty dramatically. They have never actually spoken to each other prior to the opening of part 2. Winston does not know her name. He has referred to her in his mind as the dark-haired girl. He's had several encounters with her in part 1 that we are told about via his memories and his diary and things like that, but they've never actually spoken. So part 2 opens, they're at work. They are walking in the hallway, and she is approaching him, and she appears to fall. Her arm is in a sling, and so she falls on it, and we can assume that she's doing this intentionally so that they will have a chance to sort of touch a little bit, because as he helps her up, she slips him a note. So, for example, on your quizzes, one of the questions is, Julia appears to be injured when she passes Winston the note. This is in chapter 1 of part 2. What is her injury? And I've just told you that. Her arm is in a sling. I don't know if she's actually injured. She may be, she may not be. It's probably just part of her ruse, to make sure that when she falls, when she fake falls, that Winston sort of lunges for her and tries to help her. She passes him a note. One of the questions on some of these quizzes is, what does that note say? And it says, I love you. Now, of course, she really probably doesn't love him at this point. They live in a world where that's really not an option, but it is her way of trying to get his attention and obviously express some interest in him. So it's a week or so, I believe, before they are actually able to get somewhere where they can meet and be pretty assured that they are not being spied on, that there's no microphones and there's no cameras. They initially meet in a wooded area. It's a meadow. Another question on one of these quizzes is about Winston's dreams, which he tells Julia, or he murmurs, I think, in her presence, like it reminds him of the Golden Country. And this is what he realizes in some of the dreams that he's had. This is how he refers to this area. And he's never actually been there, but now that he is with Julia, that's what he tells her that he calls it. A very important thing to understand about part 2 of 1984 is the ideological differences in Winston and Julia. And so I asked you about this on your journal last Friday, I believe, where I asked you to talk about the first 6 chapters and how their relationship changes and how their ideology is different. And so ideology is just a fancy word that means like what you believe. Winston, because of his age, because of his hazy memories, and probably because he's just a little bit of a deeper thinker than Julia, he has hope that Emmanuel Goldstein exists, that the Brotherhood exists, and he tries to talk to Julia about these things, and she just does not care, mainly because she doesn't think any of it actually exists. She can't even, in her mind, imagine a world where things are different because she's never known any different, whereas Winston did very briefly when he was a child. So one of the questions on here reads, Julia's thoughts on the Brotherhood can best be described as. She doesn't think that it exists. She doesn't think it exists at all. She thinks it's all just stuff that people have made up because they're grasping at straws, because they're so desperate for change. Let me see what else here. One of the things that Winston will do is spend some more time in the Pearl District, and he encounters a woman there who is singing, and he listens to her, he watches her, I think she's hanging her laundry up, and he cannot recall a party member ever doing that. And this is when he has his big realization that, and I asked you about this, the seniors I did on the sheet that I left for you on Monday, Winston realizes that the Proles had stayed human. And so the implication there, of course, is that Winston and Julia and the party members are not. And that is what is so lovely to me about part 2 of this book, is that it is Winston, largely through his interactions with Julia, sort of clawing his way back to his humanity and his instincts. His instinct to help Julia when she falls. His instinct to give her some flowers when he's waiting for her out in the country and she hasn't shown up yet. To pick her flowers so he'll have a bouquet to give her when she gets there. One of the reasons he spends a lot of time in the Pearl District in part 2 is because Winston and Julia continue their affair. The first time they sleep together is out in the meadow. They continue their affair in the room over Mr. Charrington's shop. And it is an interesting thing to do, to go back and read part 2 of this book once you know what happens at the end of part 2. At this point, we're sort of past the point of me not dropping spoilers, but Mr. Charrington is a member of the Thought Police. And so when you go back and you look at his conversations with Winston and you think about the shop that he owns, and where it is, the Proles are not likely to, they're not intellectually curious. That's why they're Proles. Winston is. And so Mr. Charrington's whole setup, the shop, the antiques, the things from the old world, it is a trap for someone like Winston, because it is someone like Winston who would be drawn there. And he is. It's where he buys the diary, he gets the paperweight, and then Mr. Charrington just happens to say, oh, by the way, I have this room over my shop, and he very specifically mentions that there is no telescreen. Well, there is a telescreen. And so this is what happens at the very end of part 2. But there's a lot of little anvils that drop. One of the questions on these quizzes is a line of Mr. Charrington's, and it takes on a whole new meaning when you learn who he is, and that is that the line is blank is a very valuable thing. And so on the quiz, it reads, what does Mr. Charrington say is, quote, a very valuable thing? And the answer to that is privacy. So we've covered that. Another question specific to the ideological differences in Winston and Julia. What has Julia grasped that Winston has not? And that is the inner meaning of the party's sexual puritanism. She understands more about that than Winston does. It's something that she has thought more about, and it's undoubtedly fuels her behavior. And, she tells him, I've slept with tons of party members, and Winston is delighted over this. This is another question on one of these quizzes. How does Winston react to Julia's claim to have had sex with numerous party members? He is thrilled, which is an odd reaction. But again, if you put yourself in their circumstances, you understand. He is thrilled, not necessarily that she's actually slept with that many party members. He's thrilled to have found someone else who is willing to disobey the party. The other big player in part 2 is O'Brien. And so we meet O'Brien in part 1. After about the first 6 chapters, O'Brien comes back into the picture in a major way. And O'Brien shares something at work with Winston, and that is his address. And Winston is sort of taken aback by this, because they don't just go to each other's homes. And so, so he shares O'Brien shares his address with Winston, and then Julia and Winston actually go to his apartment. And this is how part 2 sort of winds down. They go to his apartment, and O'Brien leads Winston to believe that the Brotherhood, that Emmanuel Goldstein, that all of it is true. And then he asks Winston and Julia, like, you want to be part of the Brotherhood? And I asked the seniors this on your questions from Monday, and they say yes. They say, we're willing to do whatever you want. We will murder someone. O'Brien asked them specifically, if we asked you to throw sulfuric acid in somebody's face, would you do that, in a child's face? And they said, yes, absolutely. But what they say they will not do is betray each other. And so we will talk a little bit more about this in class tomorrow, and why specifically they are asked that. It will become very obvious in part 3. We are a little over 10 minutes now, so let me see what I have not covered. So, of course, at the close of Book 2, the very end of Chapter 10, Winston realizes that Mr. Charrington has deceived him. He realizes for the first time with certainty that he is face-to-face with a member of the Thought Police. And, of course, he goes through, all the business with Julia initially. He worries that she's a member of the Thought Police. It's a constant fear in his life, but for the first time when Book 2 closes, he is certain that he is staring at a member of the Thought Police. Okay. All right. Only other thing I'll tell you is Chapter 9 of the book, it contains a book within a book, and it is the book allegedly written by Emmanuel Goldstein that O'Brien gives Winston and Julia when they visit his apartment. And, of course, Winston takes it home. He's so excited. He wants to read it. Julia doesn't care. She falls asleep. She doesn't really want to talk about all this. And it is not necessary that you read every word of that book. If you are actually reading the book, it is more important that you get to the end of Chapter 10. Chapter 10 is very short. There's a lot of questions on your quiz. I've read most of them, I think, that deal with how this all ends in Part 2. It's kind of a dramatic ending, and it's hard for me to say. I've read the book so many times, so obviously I know what happens. If you are a careful reader, I would suggest that you maybe knew that this was coming. It's always a little disappointing to some students. They were expecting, like a Katniss Everdeen type revolution against the party, and that's not how this one wraps up. So anyway, I will get this uploaded, and we will talk about this some more in class tomorrow. Bye, guys.